I've actually I gotten permission to extend the session a little bit if we find that necessary. And I think one of the reasons why I feel that might be good is that I could do a little longer, slightly longer meditation. I felt last time that it was good to have that meditation there, but with the allotted time, it became a little too short. So I thought we can use the time, maybe an extra 15 minutes or so to do a little longer meditation. And then in the question and answers discussion sharing session part of it, we can just see how we go. And if there is a lot of exciting things happening, then it's good that we have that little extra time. Does that sound good? Excellent. Okay, so let's start by just setting a good motivation or connecting with what it is that have brought you here to this session today. And that can be obviously completely individual. It can be related to our own well-being, our own happiness, our desire to find tools and ways to limit our own suffering and expand the positive states of mind. And it can also be the opportunity to share that with fellow practitioners. But it can also be the intention to cultivate something within ourselves that then becomes meaningful to share with others and helps our ability to be of benefit, of service, of use to others and help them in their journeys. So just connect with what your motivation is, and you can also cultivate it and strengthen it and enhance it. Okay, and then with that basis, we can then engage in some listening and some sharing and some discussion. Okay, so what I thought to do today was actually to pick up on a few things that has come up in the discussion so far. And also another thing that I thought would be interesting to do in relation to that is also to connect, because personally I feel it very exciting and engaging when Western science, when like brain science and other types of disciplines are able to corroborate the things that Buddhism teaches, or that the Buddhists had found out during the millennia. So I'm really interested in things that can be shown to happen in the brain in correlation to meditation and that kind of stuff. So I thought that I will discuss a few things that's come up and then also tie it in a little bit to what scientists have found and a little bit about the neurology of our brains, because for me it's I mean, it doesn't hinge on it, but I think it's really exciting when there's science that corroborates the wisdom teachings. So the first thing I just wanted to mention is that, and this is in relation to, we talked about compassion and self-compassion, and sometimes how hard it is to just be compassionate towards ourselves, and how we have this tendency to be really hard on ourselves and be very critical to ourselves. So the brain has this, it has like 3 modes of activation, like 3 separate networks or systems. and one of them is the threat system. So this is the fight and flight that we use to manage threat, and that deals with protecting us and our survival. And it's also connected to avoidance, like getting away from things that threaten us. And this is associated with a part of the brain. So if this is our brain, so inside here, here's the brain stem, and here's an area called the limbic system that kind of regulates feelings like anger and avoidance and those kind of lower mammalian impulses. And then on the front of the brain here, we have what's called the prefrontal cortex, and that's more like the higher functioning of the brain. But anyway, so the threat system is kind of here deeply in the center, and evolutionary, it's been with us all the time, basically. And then, so the threat system, and then we also have a drive system, which is all about achieving goals and consuming and accomplishing tasks and acquiring things. And those two things, the threat system and the drive system, unfortunately, that's how our brains most of the times are activated. So we go through a lot of our lives with either the threat activated, being this fight flight mode, or the drive system activated, you know, when we want to move up the career ladder, or we want to accumulate more stuff or more status or whatever it is. So yeah, so a lot of the times we're one of those two modes, and they correlate very nicely, obviously, with what the Buddhists would call the two root poisons of aversion and attachment. So a lot of the time, that's how our brains are activated. But then scientists have found that there is this third system of activation in the brain, and they call it the soothing system. So this is more about slowing down to soothe ourselves, rest and digest, as they call it, about safeness, and also about kindness and care. So, so when this system is activated, the brain looks very different, and emotionally, we're in a very different place than when this threat or drive system is activated. So this this third system would be more, in Buddhist terms, it would then maybe be more related to wisdom, love, and compassion. And I mean, we share these things with animals as well. I just I think it actually was today. I watched this video on YouTube about a lady who had taken on a rescue dog. So it was this tiny little dog. It was fairly young, and it had a horrible life up until that point, until she took it on. So whenever she got close, he just snarled at her and, you know, tried to bite her. And it had never experienced touch or care. So it was just completely filled with fear. You can just see it in his whole being, and that fear then translated into anger and so on. And it was just really sad to see. But then this lady, she spent 4 hours every day with this dog, just sitting next to it, talking to it. And then she started, you know, feeding it little pieces of things that it really liked. And in the beginning, it was very hesitant even to accept the food, accept these treats. But then slowly, some trust were starting to build, and it accepted the food. And then kind of skip to the end. This little dog was just a lovely, happy, friendly, not fearful dog, because of all this love and care and compassion that this lady showed it for over, I think it was a course of a couple of weeks. It, you know, it took for this dog to be transformed. So this is, you know, extreme example of what happens when the brain is constantly in this fear mode. And of course, in the dog's case, it was caused by external conditions. People had been beating it and treating it badly for a long time, and then that had obviously shaped the poor dog. But then that could be changed, that could be transformed. And the thing is here, and this is tying into what we talked about previously about this inner critic, because what happens when we criticize ourselves and when we attack ourselves, and that part of ourselves, it's actually, I think its intention is actually to help us, because we should do better, and we should step up, and maybe we should be more kind, and we should all these things that we should. But if we keep attacking ourselves, we're actually activating this whole threat system in our own brains. We're activating the limbic system, and it's like what other people did to that poor dog, we're doing that to ourselves. And over the years, we suffer greatly because of it. So from that neurological perspective, the question is, how can we rather activate this soothing system of our brains? How can we do what the lady did for that dog? How can we do that for ourselves? And in that way, transform our minds and our own brains so that they're able to be more in this state of calm and soothing and safeness and kindness in a space that we create for ourselves. So does that make sense, or do you find it, like myself, interesting like this, to kind of tie it also back to what happens in the brain, or what do you say? I see nods.
Everyone, just it's a small group, just unmute yourself and go for it.
Please.
I love the brain. I love psychology, and you're right. Yeah, Buddhism goes a lot. It goes very well with psychology.
Yeah, wonderful. And then another thing that I thought I would mention, and this is also tied to self-compassion and Buddhism, because you don't often hear, or at least you didn't used to hear the term self-compassion so much in Buddhist teachings. It's kind of, for Western teachers, it's changing a bit. So that's something that's, the term is being brought in. I would say that the foundation has always been there in Buddhist teachings, though, but maybe that it hasn't quite been presented in that, with that term. But so one thing that I find really interesting is, so Lama Tsongkhapa speaks about the three principal aspects of the path. So what are the three parts that we need to cultivate in order to eventually reach enlightenment? And those three are renunciation, first one, and bodhicitta, and emptiness. So renunciation, compassion, and wisdom, you could also say. But that first one is something that can cause some trouble for people, because renunciation can sound not too appealing and not too attractive. Like we need to give up stuff and just renounce the world. And there's some misconceptions that go along with that. And some people try to do that. They try to just, I don't know, they have this idea of what a holy person should be, and then they just give away all their stuff and they try and go sit on a mountaintop, and it fails miserably. So that's not what's meant by renunciation. So another translation that's sometimes used is definite emergence. So it's actually about cultivating the desire or the wish to just get out of this cesspool of suffering that is samsara, and doing that by really realizing what the causes of the suffering is, and then renouncing those causes. So you don't have to renounce the chocolate cake, necessarily. You have to renounce the attachment to the chocolate cake, because it's the attachment that is keeping us spinning in samsara. And by renouncing the causes of suffering, we're also renouncing suffering itself. So renunciation is really this deep, deep wish for ourselves to be free of suffering, which interestingly is exactly the definition of compassion in Buddhism. The definition of compassion in Buddhism is the wish for someone to be free of suffering. That's, and it's usually talk about it directed to others. So I wish that they could be free from suffering, and that's compassion. But if we direct this to ourselves, and this is where it gets interesting, it actually becomes renunciation. So when we talk about self-compassion, which is becoming more and more popular to speak about, one of the traditional terms for it in Buddhism might actually be renunciation. And then when we see that link, perhaps renunciation becomes more appealing to it. So it's not, giving up all the good things, and it's not that we're not allowed to enjoy ourselves or have good things or whatever it is. It's just about realizing that we want to be free from suffering, and then identifying what is causing that suffering, and as best we can releasing those causes. So yeah, self-compassion. Okay, and then the third thing I wanted to touch on is, and this is again, we'll go back a little bit to the brain, and we'll go back to something that we talked about. I think it was last time when this the challenge with, if you're in a caring profession, it's not only when you're in caring profession, but it becomes very pronounced, and you're meeting a lot of people who are suffering from either mental or physical causes, and you find that caring for people who suffer a lot becomes very hard. People talk about compassion fatigue, and it seems to cause burnout in people in caring professions. And I know that a lot of times people in those professions are actually taught to distance themselves from their patients, their clients, the people they work with, to avoid this emotional burnout, which is horrible, because that's probably a way to move even faster into that burnout, I would say. But it is a struggle for people who have those professions, but it's also a struggle for all of us who care for friends and family. But we find that we have a hard time actually dealing with or accepting or helping them with their suffering. So we want to move away, and we can't deal with it. And sometimes because of that reason, we may break the connection with friends or even family members. So this was something that came up, and I felt I was asked, like, so what do you do? And I didn't feel I had a really super good answer. So I went back and thought a little bit more about it, and I thought I wanted to circle back to that this time. So there's so when they started studying this, again, what happens in the brain, there's a psychologist, her name is Tanya Singer, and she's for a long time, she's studied empathy, and she brought in, I think I mentioned this briefly last time, but she brought in Mathieu Ricard, the French monk and student of His Holiness, that you might be familiar with. He's an extremely experienced meditator, and Tanya Singer brought him in, and she put him in one of these fMRI machines where you scan the brain and see what happens. And the idea was to have him meditate on empathy and see if his brain activated differently than the people that they've been studying, who was not expert meditators, but rather had no meditation experience. So she was showing images to evoke empathy, and these were images from kids in a Romanian orphanage. So these were terribly, terribly mistreated kids. And she asked Mathieu to do this meditation. And then she found that his brain was not doing what she was expecting it to do. These lower parts of the brain were not activated as was seen with people who had this empathic response normally. So she asked him, so what are you actually doing? Because this doesn't look like we're expecting it to look. And then Mathieu explained that he had meditated rather on unconditional compassion. So he was trying to feel this powerful feeling of love and kindness for the people who were suffering, and also for all sentient beings. So so Tanya expected, no, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to actually meditate on empathy and this what's called empathetic resonance, where you literally basically feel what the other person is feeling. So when you see someone in suffering and in pain, and if you're in an empathic state, then your brain, the pain centers of your brain will actually activate, and you will feel the pain and the emotional distress of that other person. So I thought I would just read, because I find this so interesting. I will read Mathieu's own description of his experience of doing this, because he expresses it much better than I will be able to do. So this is just a short section of how he experienced this exercise. So he said, during the meditation, I concentrated the best I could in order to engender the chosen mental state, empathy, to make it as clear, stable, and intense as possible. I would revive it if it weakened, and give rise to it again if distraction had temporarily dissipated it. During the session, which lasted about an hour and a half, the periods of meditation, which lasted around a minute, alternated with 30-second periods of rest. On that day, the subject of meditation on empathy had been provided for me by a disturbing BBC documentary I had seen the night before. It was about the living conditions of physically and mentally handicapped children in a Romanian orphanage. Although the children were fed and washed daily, they were practically abandoned to their fate. Most of them were horribly thin. One was so frail he had broken his leg just by walking. The nurse's aides were content to attach a makeshift splint to his leg and left him on his pallet. When the children were washed, most of them groaned in pain. Another child, also skeletal, was sitting on the ground in a corner of a bare room, vaguely nodding his head, his eyes empty. They all seemed so lost in their powerless resignation that they didn't even raise their eyes to the aides when they came toward them. Every month, several children died. I also imagined a person close to me who had been terribly injured in a car accident, lying in his blood in the side of the road, far from help, disgust as his bloody spectacle became mingled with my distress. So for almost an hour, alternating with brief neutral periods, I pictured as intensely as possible these nameless sufferings. Entering into resonance with this pain soon became intolerable. In my mind, I did not know how to engage with these children and felt rather powerless. Merely an hour of intense feeling of empathy, disassociated from love and compassion, had led me to burnout. I then heard Tanya say to me in the earphones that if I was ready to do one more session in the scanner, we could move right away onto a meditation on compassion, which had been scheduled for the afternoon. I agreed enthusiastically. So intensely did I feel how much love and compassion were lacking from empathy experienced on its own. Scarcely had I shifted the orientation of my meditation to love and compassion before my mental landscape transformed completely. The images of the children suffering were still as present and still as strong, but instead of creating in me a feeling of distress and powerlessness that was hard to bear, I now felt a profound, heartwarming courage linked to limitless love for these children. Meditating now on compassion, I felt like I had opened a gate, loosing floods of love that permeated the suffering of these children. Each atom of suffering was replaced by an atom of love. The distance that separated me from them was erased. Instead of not knowing how to approach the fragile child groaning at the slightest contact, or that blood-soaked person, I now mentally took them in my arms, bathing them with tenderness and affection. And I was convinced that in a real-life situation, I could have surrounded these children with a tenderness that couldn't fail to bring them comfort. So that's obviously a very, very experienced practitioner speaking, but I think it's so interesting to see that shift from empathy into compassion, and how clearly it shows that empathy is this feeling of pain. It is activating this fight and flight response. And that often causes us just to want to fix the other person, because, you know, their suffering is causing us pain. So we just want to, you know, give them something to not suffer, or and we just can't bear to just stay with it and stay with them, because it's like they're now causing us suffering. So we move away from love and concern and care. Whereas it's so obvious from Mathieu's description that compassion is instead this really constructive mental state, and it contains this courage and this almost like motherly love, this indiscriminate love, this universal love. And it also has this aspect of determination to help and actively engaged to limit the other person's suffering. So it does not have those negative mental states, which rather engender distress and aversion and discouragement and avoidance, and eventually you will lead to burnout. So there are these three components that are linked. The first one is, if we can cultivate loving kindness and make it as universal and all-encompassing as possible, that would be the first component. And then the other component is empathy. So entering into this empathic resonance with someone is necessary, but we cannot stay there. So it's rather like when the loving kindness meets the suffering or the empathy, or passes through the prism of that, then the result is compassion. But we have to move from this spark of empathy into this much more broad, expansive state that is compassion. And again, this is also something that we can do towards ourselves. So rather than being enmeshed in our own suffering and just the pain of it, we can try to move into a space of more loving care, tenderness, compassion, and openness towards ourselves. And interestingly, just tying this back to the brain again, it's very, very different networks in the brain that are activated when we're in this empathetic resonance that will then can lead to emotional burnout and just a whole host of problems, or when this compassionate network is actually activated. And interestingly enough, it's also related to positive emotion, which can if you're in a caring profession, that can almost be, you can almost feel guilty when there's someone suffering and you feel positive emotions about engaging with them and helping them. And it can feel wrong, because you should be feeling distress and pain, but rather you feel upbeat and positive and ready to go. And that can almost be, I've talked to some people that almost like they're not allowed to engage with the suffering in that way. But of course, it's actually much more productive way to engage with suffering, with compassion, and realizing that those aspects of compassion can actually bring positive emotion and engagement, which makes it even more important. So I thought the meditation I thought we could do would be kind of on this theme of empathy and compassion. And I thought we could see if we can potentially explore them in our own experience a little bit. And if we had if you do have an fMRI machine, a brain scanner at home, then you can also lay down in that and you can see afterwards how your brain's activated, because that might be super interesting. But I thought before we do the meditation, again, I just wanted to see if there are any, if anything came up with that, the description I just gave of empathy and compassion, or if there are any questions or comments at this point.
I found it incredibly touching and just really helpful to start to get tools in the toolbox that I feel like I never got throughout my schooling for nursing, that emphasized so heavily having empathy. And on the surface level mentioned, but take care of yourself first and these kind of things. The total framework shift of really going, like you said, from this empathetic resonance of pain centers being activated to this more universal compassionate lens is really eye-opening. I really appreciate you sharing that research.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, because it was prompted by, I felt that I didn't give a full and enough response last time to that question. So I hope this I did a slightly better job this time, because it's so, I think it's super important, whether you're in the caring professions or not. Just knowing this stuff I find very, very helpful. Okay. Anyone else?
Martin, just a very brief comment. I would say that to be alive is to be in the caring profession, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, that's excellent. And it ties back. I mentioned the Dalai Lama saying that the most fundamental aspect of being sentient being is that we care. So that also ties into that. We are all in the caring professions. Thank you. Okay, so let's do a little bit of meditation and see if we can explore a few of these things in our own experience. So, first of all, I would encourage you to find a comfortable position, either sitting upright on a chair, on a cushion, but also if you feel it's more suitable, you're more than welcome to lie down. Sometimes that's a really good way of being able to relax the body in a way that sometimes we can't when we sit upright, especially if we're experiencing some pain or problems in the body. So perfectly okay to lie down and meditate. And maybe as a first gesture of care and compassion towards ourselves, we can just allow the attention to drop down from our heads into the body. So see if you can release some of this constant problem solving and fixing and thinking and scheming and worrying and ruminating that we spend so much of our time in. And just allow yourself to experience a sense of just being embodied. If you want, you can connect with the sensation of the breathing. Paying attention to it, how it actually feels to breathe. Gently just resting your attention on the breathing like a cork bobbing on the waves of the ocean, just gently following the movements up and down, not trying to change the breath, just resting your attention on the natural rhythm of the breathing. And then you can allow your attention to become wide and broad and open. So not specifically paying attention to the breath, rather allowing your attention to be completely open. So one metaphor would be to allow it to be like the clear blue open sky, with clouds passing by in the form of thoughts and emotions and impulses and memories. Another metaphor might be to allow your attention to be like an open stage. It's like you're sat in the audience and you're watching this big stage where actors and props appear and disappear. And see if it's possible to identify more with that wide open, clear blue sky rather than the clouds passing by. So you are not those thoughts or those emotions, those impulses and feelings. They just arise in the space of your mind. And then know also that even though it might not be your direct experience right now, that space, that openness, that stillness, that nature of your mind is actually in the nature of love. So in that open space resides everything that you will ever need. It's just that it's hidden behind the veil of all those clouds that we believe in so completely, that becomes so heavy and real. Again, just for a few moments more, see if you can rather identify with that space and that openness. Just allowing the clouds to come and go. Okay, and then in that space of awareness, see if you can bring to mind someone that you know who is suffering. Someone who is in physical or emotional pain. And see if you can picture them in front of you as vividly as possible. See their pain, their suffering, their struggles. And as if you stepped into their shoes, see if you can really experience what it would be like to feel what they're feeling and take on that suffering. And then for a moment, you can release that person allowing your awareness to become again more open and spacious, and just allowing. And realize that just like this person, there are so many people, so many beings, so many animals that suffer in similar ways and in other ways. So samsara is truly the ocean of suffering. And at the same time, all of us, every single one of us, just wishes to be happy. That's all. And that's the most valid desire there is. And it doesn't matter who those other people are, they all share that wish. And the only reasonable response to that is loving kindness. It is the wish for ourselves and all these other beings to be happy. And that love, there's no reason for it to be limited to any certain individual. It only makes sense if it's universal, if it's altruistic, if it's open and allowing. So see if you can feel into that sense of loving kindness. And also see if you can really make sure that you include yourself in that loving intention. So approaching the difficulties that you experience with care and love and concern for yourself, just like for everyone else. And see if you can connect back to that openness, the expansiveness of the space in which all of this arises. Just know that the true nature of you and of everyone else is in the nature of love. Everything we need is there if we can connect to it. The true causes of suffering can be addressed. So suffering can be transformed. There are things on a practical level and on an ultimate level that we can do to help ourselves and to help others. We all have this amazing potential for change, for transformation, for growth, for waking up. And if we can really connect to that. There's no reason to be despondent. We can allow ourselves to trust love, to trust altruism, to trust compassion. We don't have to protect ourselves from our own suffering and the suffering of others. We can meet it head on with open eyes, with acceptance and clarity and courage. And just like a mother would do anything for their child, jump into the fire or the ice cold lake, we can also cultivate that willingness to come to the aid of others. So then again, with a mind that hopefully is more connected to this spacious openness, with a sense of universal love and care, with a sense of the potential for positive change, with a sense that suffering has causes and those causes can be addressed and eliminated. With those things, again, turn your attention back to the suffering person and realize that their suffering is still there. You can see it clearly, unflinchingly. But you can also hold it with this open, loving care, with this courage, with this motherly concern. And then finally, just release all effort, all visualization, all cultivation, and just allow yourself to rest. Just rest in that wide open, expansive stillness that is the nature of who you are. And then we can end this meditation at your own pace. Just come back to this meeting, this group of friends sharing their experiences. And then we can continue on with a bit of questions and sharing comments and concerns.
Hey, Martin, it's me.
Hey.
Oh my God, you packed a wallop tonight. Anyway, yeah, you did. You I've got all these thoughts running in my head right now. But yeah, very interesting, because you're talking about empathy and compassion. And when we're meditating, you know, I've experienced personal experience of people suffering personally, and recently acquaintances and friends who are suffering. And as I'm doing it, I keep thinking I can do all the empathy and compassion, and I hope those things really work for them and for me, hopefully. And the word that I can't feel their pain, because you can't feel somebody else's sufferings physically.
No.
You can't, unless you're having those ailments. It's hard to, but you could empathize. And the word that came to mind is, I feel like there's a hopelessness in their part. Not directly, you know. So if I feel like if they're hopeless, then I want to give them some kind of comfort, and some kind of hope. So that helps. So that's when the compassion for me comes in. And there was something else, and I'm having this conflict between, you know, teaching about stop the self-cherishing, it's not good for you, and then the Tonglen, exchanging oneself with others, feeling their pain, giving them happiness, sharing your. So those are all the combination I'm kind of like practicing. And, and lastly, I just say, I mean, for people who are friends who are suffering, the only thing I could do is do a lot of positive thinking and wishful thinking and lots of prayers. Hopefully those prayers can make them, you know, less painful or whatever. So that's how I approach in those situations. So thank you for making me think. All right, that's it for me.
Yeah. It's I'm happy that it started things happening. That's seems like a good thing. Yeah, and so one thing I feel that when one thing that we can always do for others who are suffering, if we're able to, you know, cultivate like this kind of courage or this kind of genuine concern, but also this kind of more, what do you say, like buoyant and happy mind in ourselves, that's a great gift to people who are suffering. They can feel that, yeah, we care for them, we help them, but at the same time, we're not weighed down and we're not bogged down. We can bring a more positive and constructive energy to the situation, because mostly suffering people are just everyone is, you know, tiptoeing, and they're you know, so everyone around them, even though they're concerned and they care, they tend to bring you down, because, you know, they're in there just feeling the suffering and everything is miserable. And so I think if we can bring more of that uplifting energy of compassion, then that can be very helpful. And that's only possible if we tend to ourselves first, which is where the teachings on self-cherishing can sometimes be confusing and misunderstood. But doing that, caring for ourselves, lifting ourselves up, being compassionate to ourselves, that's not self-cherishing. Again, it's actually renunciation. So it's actually the first step of getting anywhere on the path. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was a pretty visceral exercise for me, and pretty heavy initially. I related it back to that monk in the MRI of just almost the unbearable suffering that you can feel for and with someone. Obviously, like Victor said, we can't physically experience those ailments, but on a mental level, on a brain chemistry level, truly, it's a powerful experience. And then to shift that and bring spaciousness, but this almost counterintuitive spaciousness that also brings this unbound connection and, like you said, courageous acceptance and motherly love was great analogy to kind of the cork floating on the ocean, just a much more airy, bright feeling that, it was, for me, very visceral to feel these brain changes, especially after those awesome seeds of research that you shared. But to really feel that shift throughout this visualization was really powerful and showed how much more I need to practice that of it versus just this inner suffering of envy that I've weighed too much of my emotional bank on, and it just really was a powerful exercise for me. I appreciate you guiding that. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Martin, do you want me to share something weird?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
I used to have a lot of yoga students when I was in Tokyo, and I realized that people store, this is not new, this is not something that I just thought of, it was known, but I started to really understand it, that people store grief and just all kinds of whatever you want to call it, pain in the body, all over the body. And just twice I had this weird thing. I was stretching a lady, and she had a particular relationship with her father that had restricted her. And there was a comparable restriction in the movement of her shoulders, which is very typical. A lot of people get to about age 50 and they say, oh, I'm old, I can't move my shoulders. And so that, I don't think that's got anything to do with old age. And so I was manipulating her, and something came out, and we both felt it. So I think that I'm going to stop there. I think it relates.
Yeah.
But there was a strong, thing. I obviously had a lot of empathy for her, and this thing just came out. That's it. That's what I've got.
Yeah, I think it's almost like that like scared dog I talked about initially, that it's this lady is holding something, but then I imagine that you created a space in which she felt safe and cared for, and that's when she was able to release this thing that was like physically in her body. On some level, she was able to just be safe enough to finally let something go.
I've got something that comes up, which is the discussion of happiness. And I wonder if that word is well translated for Westerners. Because for me, I think of like happy meals or happy birthday. It doesn't feel what I think ultimately sentient beings want is fulfillment. And that feels more, so I sort of have to reword it in my head when there's a happiness discussion. And that seems to be helpful for me. So I just wanted to, sort of spell that out. Whatever goes on with me, I react with certain things, and happiness is one of them. So yeah, but it's like what I think we're trying to do, if you use the Buddhist terminology, is every being is trying to get back to their ultimate Buddha nature. And that's the discontentment. That's the actual suffering. Yes, we have suffering of all kinds, physical, mental, emotional, lack of resources, all of that. But ultimately, it's that discontentment about not being able to be who we really are. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, wonderful. I couldn't agree more. It's like I think a lot of the grief and sadness that we experience just comes from the fact that we, on a subconscious level, we're fully aware that we're not being who we truly are, that there is this disconnect, and it's really sad in a way, because we cling to so much that we think we are, and we identify with so many things that's not it, and that brings us further and further away from what is already right here. We don't have to go anywhere. We just have to fully realize who we already are in a way. And also, like you said, the word happiness has all the wrong connotations. The Greek talked about, and this is actually something that might be interesting to talk a little bit more about in a coming session. But so the Greek talked about, they called it hedonia, which is the sensory pleasures of the good meal or the great company or the sex or whatever. So stuff that we can get from the world. So that's one kind of happiness. More, maybe you should actually call it pleasure. And then they talked about eudaimonia, which more the happiness that comes from what you bring to the world rather than what you get from it. And that's a much deeper sense of satisfaction, of contentment, of ease, and a much deeper joy that comes from that. So in a Western context, and also there's a lot of research now from a field called positive psychology, where they start to use those two terms of hedonia and eudaimonia. So most people wouldn't be familiar with them, but at least that concept of the difference between them is not super hard to explain to someone. But I guess we need a greater, I don't know, better words for things in that are shared commonly among people that we really don't have. We have happiness, and then everyone reads something different into what that is. But yeah, so I agree completely on both those points. Okay, is there anything else that came up, or I don't know, any ideas about how we can like implement these things in our day-to-day? The course is called Be Your Own Therapist after all, so so how do we do this in relation to what we've been discussing? Well, I can say that for me, it's I really like that this thing is called Be Your Own Therapist, because that completely removes any responsibility on my part to be the therapist for you, because that's not going to work in the long run anyways. I can just share some ideas and some tools that I have received from my teachers. I'm trying to pass things on. None of this is there's not a single original idea on my part here in anything I talk about. I'm just feeling really grateful and happy to be able to pass some things on that I've picked up along the way from my amazing teachers. And then I can offer it, and hopefully you can take it, and there's something helpful in there that you can apply in your own lives. And yeah, that's it. You already have, like I said, you already have everything you need. And hopefully some of what I say can just be a reminder of where to look, potentially. Okay, maybe that's a good, that was 15 minutes longer. I felt that was a little better, a little bit more spacious. So if you agree, maybe we can keep that format of maybe at least an hour and 15 instead for the next time. Okay, so yeah, let's just think that whatever positive energy was created here, whatever meritorious karma we managed to amass, we don't cling to it ourselves. We don't claim it as our own. Rather, we just release it into the world and hope that it will be of benefit. And yeah, that's it. Thanks.